All right, it is 5 o'clock here in Eugene, and that means John Evans and I are back on the Voice of College Football, Oregon Live, breaking down, a pretty solid win for the Ducks, 56-10 over Rutgers. And we're gonna get ahead, take a look at this Wisconsin game of the weekend, the Grateful Dead game. Ducks revealed some jerseys on Sunday. We got a quick look at those. We'll take a look around college football, tell you what's going on there. Take a look ahead at the Ducks schedule, see what's in store for the Ducks. John, I know you didn't watch this game live, but you've had a chance to watch it back. What really went well for the Ducks here?
Yeah, I was out of town this weekend, so I was trying to keep up with it as much as I could when it was going on Saturday. But when I got the chance to finally watch the full thing back this morning, wow, yeah, everything that I expected to see, what was there. This team bounced back in the way that you were hoping to. An absolutely dominant game. You look at the yardage total, over 750 yards, one of the highest in school history. The scoreboards there, they're doing it on and every facet of the game. The running game really bouncing back. I was really excited to see in general. But when you look at a team that last week's loss was such an emotional situation where it's in front of the home crowd, you're looking for how this team is going to respond to that and how they're going to bounce back. And that's exactly what you got out of this team. They came out hungry. And we'll get into it later, but just the way that even when you have a little bounce back at the beginning, when Gary Bryant fumbles and that you come right back out on that next drive and you're still able to go down and score points and not let that affect you. I think this team's mentality is in the right spot and they're doing the right things as we head down to the final stretch of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just quickly update you on the AP poll. Ducks up to number 6 after that win at Rutgers. A little bit of a shakeup. I think it was only one team, that's Ohio State, kept its spot in the top 25 this week. John, does number 6 feel about right for the Ducks here?
I mean, when you consider that there was obviously you have Miami fall on Friday night in that Louisville game, but then Texas Tech, who is right ahead of Oregon, loses to Arizona State as well. So it makes sense to jump up 2 spots when you pass those 2 teams. But Oregon still, because of where they're at with the strength of their resume, the teams they actually have beaten, it's not to the level of what Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M have been doing in the SEC so far. So I think it's a right spot for the Ducks, and they'll continue to be in that range as long as they keep winning these games that they should be winning against inferior opponents throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tee you up here. We've got our exclamation points and question marks that we do every week. This week it's post Rutgers. John, what's your first exclamation point? We're back to 2-1 in favor of the good guys.
Yeah, a big win this week. So back to 2 things that we're excited about. First thing for me is just the way that they stuck with the ground game after that. It at times felt like it had moments of success, especially in that first half, that second quarter with Jordan Davison in that game against Indiana. And then in this Rutgers game this past Saturday, everybody was getting it done on the ground. Jordan Davison was picking up huge chunks, but you get that first possession that doesn't quite go right. You get behind the sticks, throw a screen pass out there. And after that, they really stuck to the ground game. You end up with 415 yards in total, averaging over 11 yards per carry. 11th most in program history, and it fell out of the top 10 because of kneel downs at the end of the game. So they were just absolutely dominant on the ground, and I really feel like Noah Whittington has kind of come back to being that number 1 option within this ground game for Oregon. You look at it, and it's 11 attempts for him just to kind of get that solidified again, is to have a number 1 guy where he felt like you had that at the start of the year, but then when he had the injury, even though he was playing this last week or 2, he wasn't really fully back. It felt like he looked like the guy we saw at the beginning of the year, breaking those big runs against Oklahoma State again. So really excited about that, obviously. And then Jordan Davison, I think you got those 2 as a 1-2 punch is looking like one of the best options that this Oregon team has.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talked about before this one was just getting back to the amount of diversity that Oregon had, and it really feels like they did that, especially with the rushing attack, which really got limited against Indiana. It felt like that was back to some semblance of the full strength that made against a much weaker rushing defense. I mean, I would win a little bit more broad here. I really appreciate this. This was the type of response that Oregon needed, not necessarily because it won by 46 points and was up 43 to 3 at halftime, but just like in how comprehensively the Ducks beat the Scarlet Knights here. It felt like this wasn't just a game where the Ducks, and we'll get into this one, because it has better athletes. It felt like the Ducks were really on a level where they were out scheming the opponent, which is really what we wanted to see in this game, is because, you look at this one, you say, hey, maybe you can't take too much away from it because, Kenyon Sadiq is going to be better than whoever he's up against just because it's Rutgers. It felt like, yes, like that was true, but also like guys were open because of the way Will Stein was able to scheme and sequence plays in this game. Was that something you saw?
Definitely. That's the kind of the next point I had, and connecting that back to what I said about the beginning of the game. When I was on Odds and Audibles talking to Eric Scopel last week. One of our little props at the beginning of the game was the amount of message board like hate comments for Will Stein if Oregon went 3-and-out on their first possession, and for Oregon to get into a situation 3rd and 11. This is exactly what Oregon fans hate, is seeing these 3rd and long screen passes to guys like Gary Bryant, who has done very well on those opportunities this year, but he pops it up. I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the message boards, but I'm sure they were not very positive towards Will Stein at that point of the game. So to be able to come back from that, and then immediately after that, everything reset. The offense looked completely clean. Dante Moore executed really very cleanly throughout the rest of the game, and not only was executing well, but then hitting the deep shots, hitting the trick plays that they brought out a couple of times. But Kenyon Sadiq was wide open all night. Decorian Moore was wide open all night. And to be able to kind of you can see the hunger that this team has, and that Dan Lanning has instilled in them, and that's going to be present throughout the rest of this year, kind of coming off of that loss where things weren't up to the level that they felt like they should have been at, because they talk about every week playing Oregon versus Oregon. I don't think they felt like they beat Oregon in that Indiana game. I think they feel like they beat Oregon in that Rutgers game, and that's the way you want to continue to play throughout the rest of this year. You're going to set the standard and continue to kind of meet it throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that really gets to that point. And in terms of players looking like themselves again, Oregon looked like itself again in this game. So did Dante Moore. He only threw 20 passes, was 15 of 20 in this game. 290 yards, 4 touchdowns. There's the pick at the end that we'll talk about. I really felt like he looked like himself in this game. And a big part of that was because he was upright the whole time. Definitely no sacks. I can't remember a pressure. And it was the fact that when the pocket did, start collapsing a little bit, he would step up and stick with his reads. It was that Indiana game where he, would move off reads really quickly because he felt pressure and because he was getting sacked so early and so often. And that looked like it really had gone away in this game. I was really encouraged to see that.
Yeah, Rutgers wasn't going to do as many things to change that pre-snap and post-snap look for Dante. As Indiana was doing in that game, which is really what was complicating things, making him see things that weren't happening out there. But I was really impressed by the way that it just looked like he was confident in his reads, and it felt like every time he was hitting the back of his drop and able to just fire the ball out and attack downfield on plays like the touchdown to Decorian Moore on a dagger route. It was a phenomenal game from Dante. The fact that all 3 touchdowns early came from over 20 yards out, and then he hits the last one to Whittington out of the backfield. But you could see the arm coming out again in this one as they were stretching things out vertically, hitting those seam routes to Sadiq and such.
Yeah, and I mean, and your concern with the young quarterback is that, hey, like he does have a bad game and he's not able to rebound from it. I think this is proof that Dante really is able to reset, and that's something that you get from him being able to sit with so many guys who have so much experience, like Dylan, who shout out to him, got his first NFL win this weekend in a kind of a crazy game, crazy weather, but to see Dante just be able to so quickly come back like that is really encouraging to me.
Yeah. All right. Now, Owen, I want to hear where the question marks lie for you after this game. Well, what is something that's still, you're leaving in doubt a little bit, because Oregon played looks like a great game, but this is a Rutgers team that has struggled, especially on the defensive side of football this year.
Yeah, I mean, and where I really wanted to go with this was just, how much, we already answered this question a little bit, but just how much of this was because Oregon had better athletes, how much of this was because Noah Whittington is faster than anybody that Rutgers can leave to chase him, and how many of these explosive plays, because I think the Ducks had 15 by the end of the game, were yes, well schemed plays that got guys open, but they, that's a 5-yard play or a 7-yard play against Indiana, against Ohio State. That's really, there is still a level to which you come out of this game saying, okay, now I want to see it against a great team. And the Ducks, probably won't see a great college football playoff caliber team until the postseason.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, because that's also kind of where the question mark lies with me here, is just where does this team meet resistance throughout the rest of the year? Because now we'll talk about it a little bit later. I think USC is still a good team. They lose that game to Notre Dame this weekend and fall out of the rankings. So now still no one left ranked on the rest of the schedule. But gosh, man, this Oregon is going to be so much better than a lot of these teams throughout the rest of the year. It feels like, where are they going to find those moments to show that they did learn things from those Indiana games and show that they have improved, and not just, like you said, being better athletes, being so much better prepared for this game than that Rutgers seemed to be last weekend. We're going to have to see it throughout the rest of the year, because right now I'm not sure where that's going to come. I think USC is still the time for that. But that's going to be a game in front of this Autzen crowd in November. USC is going to be coming up. The weather's probably not going to be as nice as it is in Southern California for them. So could like that might not be the situation where Oregon's really tested physically like they are going to be by these other teams once it comes postseason time in December and January.
Absolutely. Well, it certainly doesn't seem like Wisconsin's going to be that level of test. It didn't look like Rutgers was either. We're going to just take a little bit of time now that we've really been able to take a look at it and really see what went right for the Ducks. John, what did go right? I know we've got a couple points here laid out.
Yeah, so Oregon was just so much better than Rutgers in the trenches that it just set the standard for the game, and that Rutgers wasn't going to be able to do anything. Like you mentioned, the O-line really clean throughout that entire game. Dante only credited with he only was pressured 3 times in that one per PFF, but all 3 of those were not ones credited to the O-line. So everyone was doing really solid. And obviously when you're watching, you can see that these guys, the Rutgers defensive linemen really just can't go anywhere. You can't move Isaiah World and Alex Harkey the way that some of these Indiana guys were. So the offensive line was really good. Rushing lanes were huge all night. And you could see that, especially like the Davison run up the middle, that he got about like 60 or almost 70 yards on, just a duo call. And it's just perfectly blocked, working a combo between Poncho and Iuli and getting to the second level. Huge hole up the middle for him. And then the defensive line was also awesome in this game. I thought this was Tatum Tuioti, maybe his best game I've seen from him, especially as a pass rusher. That the speed rush he had to get that strip sack on Calic Manis, I think is maybe the best individual play I've seen of his career. That was awesome. I just love to continue to see him develop and get better every game, because the combo of him and Mateo Uiagalelei is one of the better edge rusher duos at this point that anybody's going to see around the country.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And while we're talking about the offensive line, I want to get in a little bit because there was a discussion about a potential change there and pushing Harkey inside and bringing out somebody, maybe I think it was Janoris Wilson in at right tackle. That wasn't how the Ducks started the game, but they did do that, in the second half when there certainly wasn't anything at stake. Is that something that you're curious about going forward? Do you feel pretty good about Harkey at right tackle, in this game and then also going forward?
I thought he played solid for sure at right tackle. I think part of that is just you have an opportunity to do that in this kind of Rutgers game and just experiment a little bit and see if that might be the better option. I'd have to dive into the film on those two guys and see how they played in those different spots. But from what I saw from the initial viewing, everything seemed clean for me in terms of operation. And Harkey is a guy that fits very well at a guard. I think he'll be a guard at the next level because he has that kind of just mauler attitude in the middle. I think he would be very solid there just because he can move people well in the run game, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to start talking about just a little bit about the secondary. We had hyped up the Rutgers receiving core. Honestly, you brought up the stat that they're 1-2 in contested catch rate, and the Ducks really shut them down all night. I know there was an injury there that maybe limited them, but you still feel like this is another strong point for Ducks secondary that really just feels like it keeps getting better.
I mean, you just look at the overall numbers for Calic Manis in this game, and the fact that he's completing less than half of his passes. He's under 100 yards in this game, a couple of picks. Early on, they were trying to hit those shots down the sideline, early on, Oregon was able to establish that those weren't going to work. I think almost all of the defensive backs had a PBU in that game, and I pulled the numbers specifically on the contested catches for Rutgers. They went 3 for 9. Duff, the big 6'6" receiver, had one of them, and then they had one in the slot that they credited, which just isn't the same scenario as what Rutgers has been trying to do all year with these big guys on the outside. Like you mentioned, Ian Strong did go down at one point. He came back into the game, but he just seemed a little limited after that. I think he only had 1 or 2 targets in the game. I don't even know if he had a catch. It took away another option, one of the main 2 options there for Rutgers. So, yeah. But overall, yeah, this cornerback room, I was impressed to see too, Naeem Offord getting some run there, just because I think he ended up leading the group in snaps overall. Really? Because, let me pull up the PFF real quick.
Yeah, I mean, but I was really impressed, and especially Aaron Flowers too, who had one of the interceptions. Yeah. He's been a guy who's really grown, just in terms of role, and he's another guy who you felt like has learned from a guy that knows a lot. Offord was getting to play next to Dylan Thieneman. Go ahead with Offord. Yeah,
he was 35 snaps. Finney was second in the corners with 34. So it's just not. They didn't challenge him a ton, and he got a lot of run throughout that second half. But I just like to see him getting an opportunity to get that experience out there as well. So, especially as he had kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit as things condensed and things got more serious against Penn State and Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like we've been poking around it all season, but this is just really one of the groups that's done a great job coming together. We heard a great story. I think it was Flowers, right? No, it was Finney who's sitting with Thieneman like
Yeah, Poncho
in
was the one
lunch
who
table.
told
This
that
was
story,
Poncho's
actually.
story.
Yeah.
He's just sitting with Thieneman at the lunch table and just talking to him. And looking at stuff with him. There was one. Gosh, I think it was from post Rutgers where he's just talking about Finney just being the guy who's sitting in the film room every day. He'll find him there at 11 p.m. Watching was it the defensive line tape? That this is just a unit that these are great individual athletes and they found a great way to come together, and I've been really impressed by it.
Yeah, I've been talking to Thieneman all year about how he is a leader for this group, and you can see a lot of these guys do look up to him. But it's also cool to see. Like I was putting together a story about Finney last week, and we knew we were getting Poncho in the interviews, and Poncho is a guy who everybody else on the team points to him as one of the biggest leaders. So I wanted to hear from him how he sees a young guy in Brandon Finney, who has stepped up so early in his career, and like Dan said, he's really been a guy who leads by example. Finney talked about his process, and that is things like he is the guy and putting that extra time in the film room. He's one of those guys who's out there extra time after practice to just catch some balls from the jugs machine and just work on parts of his game, work on his footwork on the ladders and stuff like that. He's putting in all he's doing, and like you said, eating with Thieneman. Poncho's like, yeah, every time I'm in the cafeteria, I see Finney. They're talking to Thieneman at breakfast, lunch, dinner, picking his brain, asking him because he knows that Thieneman is a guy who has done this at some of the highest levels in college football, and he recognizes that and wants to imitate those things that have gotten him there. So I think that's just really impressive and mature to see from such a young guy and a true freshman. And you've seen that throughout this year. When we talked to DeCorian Moore, you could tell that he was a guy who is very mature and is able to handle things beyond his years. And I'm excited to see if we hopefully get to talk to these freshman running backs at some point, because the impact that these guys on both sides of the ball have made on this team at their age, so exciting to think about the future of this program, knowing they're going to be around for a couple more years.
Yeah. The last thing I really want to touch on from this Rutgers game was just like the level to which Oregon beat the Scarlet Knights with scheme. There's that 3-play sequence. I think Coach Dan Casey posted it. It's been going around that was really the flash, but it felt like all night, like you had mentioned, the receivers are just like, they're open because DeCorian Moore ran a sweet double move and split safety, but they're also open because it's a great route concept. Where'd you see the balance there?
Yeah, like you said, that the 3-play sequence is one that obviously stands out when you're looking at a fake flip to Dante Moore coming from a receiver position. Then you go polecat, and then it's a flea flicker. That's just a Will Stein in his bag type of sequencing. But throughout the night, I like the way that Oregon. It didn't feel like so early as much. Again, I'll have a Will Stein article at some point this week once I fully chart out all the offensive plays. But it felt like early on they maybe didn't try to establish the ground as much, but as they got into that one in the second quarter, the third quarter, they were just running their regular concepts on the ground, their counters that they like, the duo stuff, and just picking up 6 to 7 yards on all of these carries, running everything, just the scheme very efficiently. So they were able to, and then when you do that, then you could set Dante Moore up in these opportunities to take the shots downfield where you're in second and short, third and short. You feel more comfortable. If you don't get it, then you can, have an opportunity to convert later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're gonna just take a quick look around college football here before we go to a break, John. Just what happened? Where are we at? It was a pretty big weekend for everybody else, all things concerned.
Yeah, we'll talk about it a little later as we kind of look ahead to what still remains for Oregon on the schedule. But the 3 ones that jump out for the Ducks, USC and Washington both go down, and then Iowa picks up a pretty good win against Penn State. Penn State obviously hasn't been on the downswing, but in their first game in the post James Franklin era. But all 3 of these teams now sitting at 5-2. Iowa and USC both with solid 3-1 records in the Big Ten. So teams that not necessarily in that top 25 range at this point, but could continue to look like they can add to Oregon's resume at some point throughout this year and give them a decent challenge. I think USC is still a team that I look to the most. I think they were in that game against Notre Dame as I was reading some stuff on ESPN and The Athletic about that one, just trying to figure out what went down. It seems like they were in that game pretty well. Notre Dame, I think, is honestly one of the best teams in the country, and they're sitting at 12th in the AP poll right now. But because you look at their losses, and it's Texas A&M, who's now the number 3 team in the country, and Miami, like those teams Miami was the number 2 team in the country. So their losses were good. So they fell down early because they were started 0-2. But I think Notre Dame is a better team than they're getting credit for at this point. And so I think that loss, I'm honestly surprised that at 5-2 USC fell all the way out of the rankings. I think I would have been comfortable.
They are top of the receiving votes, but yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah, exactly. I think I would have been comfortable still putting them in that 22 to 25 kind of range.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to head to a break here really quick, then come back, give you a big preview for Wisconsin and the rest of the season, I think. Just take a look at what's coming up for the Ducks. See you on the other side.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
All right, welcome back to Eugene, where I'm Owen Murray with John Evans here. We're breaking down Oregon's season so far. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a Wisconsin preview, John. This is not a great team that the Ducks are welcoming to Autzen Stadium, right in the bottom of the Big Ten. Just how bad, I guess, is this Wisconsin team?
It's been tough for them. Unfortunately, my younger brother is a Badger. He has been there the last 2 years and has not been too pleased with what he has discovered since becoming a Wisconsin fan. He texted me this weekend. He was ready to just get destroyed by Jeremiah Smith. Turns out it was Carnell Tate who ended up doing the damage to them this past weekend. Wisconsin has their offense has really struggled. The biggest thing that my brother continues to tell me is that he's so mad that they continue to want to run an air raid scheme when they're a team that has for so long, when they were good under guys like Brett Bielema, and we're consistently that team that was coming out of the weaker half of the Big Ten. We're a power team playing strong defense. I think their defense honestly is not as bad as it would really seem. And I think the fact that you come out of these games and you're only giving up 34 to Ohio State and 38 to Alabama, and it's not 45, 50-point blowouts. I think that's honestly not as bad as you'd expect. I mean, a 37-point loss to Iowa doesn't look great when you consider it's Iowa and what they do offensively normally. But yeah, this team is tough. So it's I think this is, when you look at the rest of Oregon's their schedule the rest of the way, this is the game that stands out to me as the biggest blowout the rest of the way, especially when you consider it's going to be at home. Pretty good atmosphere for that Grateful Dead game this weekend, hopefully.
Absolutely. I mean, and so I went to go pull some stats for the run for a daily Ammo article I'm putting together. And they're actually pretty okay against the run. I want to say it's something like 14th nationally in defense against the run. They're allowing like 3.2-ish yards per carry, but they're allowing 8.2 yards per pass, and that just it's one of those situations where you don't have to do too well in the running game against them just because they're so susceptible on the back end. When you start looking at what does success look like in this game here, is it just, I don't want to necessarily say this is rinse and repeat of Rutgers, because the context to that was a little bit different, and that you're coming off a loss. Like, is there stuff you still want to see take another step after that Rutgers game, or is this just like, hey, let's get another blowout, keep it going?
Like you mentioned with the run game, Wisconsin has done that pretty well. And you think about Wisconsin football, that's generally something they do pretty well. They have guys who come out on their defensive line who are NFL players typically, and are solid in their linebacker positions. I think that's something that definitely I want to see continue to kind of build on that momentum you found in that Rutgers game. You don't necessarily need to run for 400 yards, and a lot of that is because you're breaking so many explosives. But I think if you can consistently be over 5 to 6 yards per carry in this game against a team that has been pretty solid, that's the thing they've done the best against this year defensively. I think that would definitely be an area to start for the Ducks.
Yeah, and then you start looking at the secondary, and I'm saying, hey, like they did really completely shut down a team in Rutgers, and that's what you really want to see because that I think is one of the units with the highest ceilings. This team, it may be one that we haven't necessarily seen yet. Like what is Brandon Finney's ceiling? What is the ability for a guy like Dylan Thieneman to yes, like he can be great over the top. We keep seeing him come down underneath in that role, the rover role. And like what is the ceiling there? I was 123rd in the country in passing offense. Like just how much stock, I guess, can you put in a really solid performance from Oregon secondary here?
I think an absolute shutdown should be the expectation here because you think about you're coming off a game where Rutgers has been able to pass the ball pretty well on most of the teams that they've faced so far this year. I think Oregon is a particularly bad matchup for them because of the types of players they have at corner with guys like Finney and Obadegwu. But when you're coming off a game in that where Rutgers entered that, Calic Manis was a top 10 passer in the country, and you shut him down and hold him to, I think, under 80 total passing yards on the game, and less than 10 completions. Yeah, you got to be holding these Wisconsin quarterbacks. I think it's Simmons they made the move to. Hunter Simmons they made the move to recently, who's been starting for them, and they just limit these guys' passing attempts because you can tell that they don't trust what they're able to do. Wisconsin has, and they haven't run the ball necessarily that well either, which sets them up poorly. So I think you should absolutely be looking to shut them down. I think if you look the fact that they haven't scored a touchdown in their last 2 games, you allow more than 2 scores in this game. That's absolutely a disappointment. It should be 3 points, 7 points at the most for this Wisconsin team.
Yeah, I mean, you start looking at like this. This is where I think the mentality that Dan Lanning starts to preach, the Ducks Oregon versus Oregon mentality. It's like Oregon really isn't playing Wisconsin in this game. You almost want to say that's the mentality that they're looking at because this is a game where Oregon's really pushing itself to get better. And you start looking at stuff like just how great can we be on the back end? Can we like be so great that we're shutting this team out for the 3rd game in a row? I think that's really what I'm looking for here is just, confidence. And then also like top to bottom, you got to see earlier in this season, the second and third rotations, like throughout the depth chart really didn't look as strong. Against Rutgers, I thought it was really impressive. The level to which guys, in the secondary, on the defensive line, were able to come in and continue, close to that level of shutdown.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the second unit did do a really good job at the end of the game. You look at that touchdown for Rutgers, and it just came off the short field from the Moore interception. Yeah. I think the second unit did do good, and I think this, like you said, this is another good opportunity to give those guys chances. And because you've been playing, Cooper Perry's already used his red shirts. There's no reason to not let him at least get chances to be on the field and feel like he's contributing, because it's going to contribute to his development next year and the year after that. It's every snap these guys get out there is going to do wonders for them as they get into next offseason and the next season after that.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a look a little bit further down the schedule here, check in on a few of those future opponents like we had mentioned here, John. And let's start with USC. We said they dropped out of the rankings here. Where do they really rank here? Like, how great of a win would that be for Oregon by the time they come here in what is that week 10? It's
11. It's the
11.
Last one before Washington. They go to Washington at the end of the season. It's the 11th game. I don't know about the weeks so I guess it's like week 13 or something because you got a couple of buys in there. I still think that's the biggest game on Oregon's schedule left. The fact that it's at home is definitely an advantage for Oregon. I think the Washington game, it will be a solid test of a hard road environment. Same thing with Iowa. And we'll talk about those teams as well. But I think USC is still one of the better teams. Maiyava has been very good at quarterback. They have a Micaiah Lemon has been one of the best receivers in the country and is a guy who not necessarily physically dominant like a guy like Surratt was against Oregon's corners, but just gets open all the time and is such a heady receiver and obviously very good after the catch. Gonna definitely challenge this team defensively. USC has been better on defense than they have been in other years under Lincoln Riley, but it's still not to a level that I think it's too much of a test for Oregon. So that's where I'm looking as I look through the rest of the schedule. But again, now they're unranked. You still don't even have a ranked team on this entire schedule, or a team that's ranked at the moment on this entire schedule, except Indiana, and that's a loss now.
Yeah, and then I mean, you start looking at what didn't go well for USC in this Notre Dame game, and the big thing is that Jeremiah Love goes 24 for 228 and a touchdown, and that will lose you a game any day. And you start looking at Oregon's running backs and you say, yes, there are talented guys in this room. Are they Jeremiah Love level? I don't know. But this is certainly, a game where Oregon really can't look to flex. What's become really strong, especially running back game by committee, like against the Trojans defense that against good running backs really can't stand up when you start looking at stuff about athlete to athlete there.
I wouldn't mind to see even Noah Whittington continue to take on more of a little bit more of a running back one role. Doesn't need to be a bell cow guy, but more where like Jordan James and Bucky Irving were for Dan Lanning's teams, where they're about like 15 or so touches a game on the ground. I thought Noah Whittington was awesome in that game, and he's a guy that sometimes you just need a little bit of that veteran experience that they've seen more outside zone plays than Jordan Davison or De'Aaron Hill have. The more you're on the field, the more you've seen, the more you're able to read and react in real time. And I think Noah Whittington has done really good in that. And that's how he's able to make that extra cut to get those bursts into the second level and create those huge plays. So I wouldn't mind continuing to see. Jaden LeBar was out in that game, so things are continuing to shuffle in the running back rotation, it seems. But I wouldn't mind seeing Whittington become really that 1A guy, and then Davison and Hill find their roles as the short yardage, the damage, and another explosive option in Hill.
Yeah, I mean, you remember the last time USC came to Autzen, the last time the Ducks actually faced the Trojans, it was really a game defined by a couple of explosive plays. You had a long Troy Franklin touchdown, a long Tez Johnson touchdown, and that really feels like it could be how this game is decided too. Like, who gets the 70-yard score to really get a quick touchdown?
Because Maiyava and Lemon are going to test you. Those guys are
absolutely
legit one of the best quarterback receiver combos in the country, and they're guys that threaten downfield and I mean really to all levels of the field, but they will threaten you downfield. They'll test your ability to communicate in the secondary. So that's probably the matchup. If you talk individual player this year, probably one of the ones I'm most excited to see against Oregon.
Well, I mean, you go from a phenomenal offense and a defense that you have some questions about to one that's almost the opposite. You look at Iowa, unranked as well, of course, faces Minnesota before the bye week, and is one of those teams that has a bye week before facing the Ducks. Ducks will also come off a bye before that game against the Hawkeyes. This is a team, of course, that shut out Wisconsin. We already mentioned that earlier here. Played Iowa State close this year, but maybe doesn't feel like it's at the level that we've seen Iowa teams that really have given some really top level Big Ten teams issues in past years. It doesn't feel like it quite is at that level.
No, their defense isn't the top tier defense that they've had at certain points, but it's still a very good unit, and they're a little bit more balanced this year. Now I cannot remember the name of their quarterback because it was one that I was struggling to pronounce earlier when I was doing research.
Mark Gronowski.
Yes. Gronowski. He had a good game in that Penn State game, and they were using him on the ground a lot. So I think that's going to be something that's interesting to see because you're going to face quarterbacks, especially in the playoffs, quarterbacks who have that dual threat ability and are going to be able to test you with their legs. So I think that's an interesting matchup there for sure because that's what they did really well against that Penn State team. I just think the biggest thing about that matchup is the fact that it is a November game in Iowa in a place that's going to be cold and in traditional Big Ten territory. You looked at the game last year at Wisconsin, where they really struggled in a situation like that. I looked to that to kind of have an answer to that game to prove that it's not going to be another late season struggle.
Absolutely, and the Ducks really aren't, aside from potentially a first round game if they were going to head somewhere, would be playing in domes or in Seattle the rest of the year, or obviously at Autzen Stadium. That probably will be the most weather tested game that the Ducks necessarily have, on the rest of this home and away schedule here. That almost feels like one where, you look at that Wisconsin game, you say, let's put ourselves in an uncomfortable situation. Maybe it is a closer game, but this is a great opportunity, not given the quality of teams to test ourselves. A difficult place to play might be the next best option.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about difficult place to play and great quarterback and receiver duos, and the Ducks close this year out. Of course, with a trip to Seattle, face the Washington Huskies and the greatest offensive trio in college football, DeMond Williams Jr., Denzel Boston, and Jonah Coleman here. Washington loses this weekend 24-7 to Michigan. Williams throws 3 picks. They do play a ranked opponent right now, number 23 Illinois next week. Then Wisconsin, Purdue, and UCLA before they welcome the Ducks into the greatest setting. Like last year, these Huskies really didn't end up being a test for the Ducks. And almost in a good way. You remember the 10 sacks. You remember just how phenomenal the Ducks played in that game. Is this just shaping up to be the same thing?
No, I don't think so. I think this Washington team is still a good team. They went in, I think Damon Williams got a little flustered at a big game, 3 picks for him, and he was under pressure throughout that one from the Michigan defense. He hasn't gone into a lot of situations like that in the big house. When you look at a redshirt freshman quarterback, I think this Illinois game is going to be really interesting to see for Washington this weekend, because you look at what the rest of their schedule is after that, and it's Wisconsin, Purdue, and UCLA at this point has been on a roll a little bit, so they
they're
might
not ranked.
be an interesting game for Washington towards the end of the year there. But I think that Illinois game is really a good test for them, because it feels like going at Michigan, that's a game you definitely had a chance to win, but Michigan is still a good team. They're now ranked 25th. And then obviously their other loss on Washington's schedule is at home against Ohio State in a game that was close-ish in the first half before Ohio State really did kind of show a little bit of levels in the second half. But if you're going to get a big win the rest of the year, Oregon game aside, obviously that would be the biggest win for Washington the rest of the way. This is the chance at home against a ranked team in Illinois. I think Washington has a chance to win. Definitely has a chance to win this game, and this is an opportunity for Damon Williams to bounce back and show that, hey, I can be a winning quarterback, and we are going to test teams like Oregon later on this year.
Yeah, and I remember leaving that Washington game last year thinking, man, Damon Williams is going to be a really, really phenomenal player.
Yeah,
like he was just running for his life here, and still, he looked really great. Like Denzel Boston made a couple unbelievable catches in this game. The running game obviously didn't get off the ground, but we know just how good those guys can be. We talked about how good Maava and Lemon are. Where do these guys stack up kind of in the grand scheme of college football?
Yeah, that's another test there. Damon Williams, another guy really good with his legs, and a guy who can get out of the pocket and create plays off structure. And then Boston is another guy who's just big and talented. Not many guys move like the way he does at 6'4". There's a reason they have him as a punt returner, despite him being a 6'4" guy who can win jump balls on the outside. So you got some good opportunities to face strong receivers here down the stretch with Boston and Lemon in those last couple of weeks. So I think that's exciting for these Oregon corners. And we know guys like Brandon Finney, they're excited for matchups where they're going to get tested by some of the best receivers in the country.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's really what I want to hammer home with this segment is that, yes, it's very possible the Ducks won't face another ranked team, depending on what this USC team ends up being by the time we get to week 13. But what's important, not necessarily from a ranking standpoint, but just from a where really does Oregon stand standpoint, is that everything that we criticize them for in the Indiana game, not being able to play the run, they're going to play a good run defense kind of in that Iowa team. Not being able to stop a big wide receiver, they play Denzel Boston. There will be opportunities to see where the Ducks stand, especially later in this year, about what this team really looks like heading into a very important time where they will be playing, ranked teams, top 12 teams.
Yeah, you just kind of got to find the it's about finding those small areas to make improvements where it's not. You don't have that opportunity to test yourself as a whole necessarily, but it's about finding small areas where you can say, hey, I did this better today. I did this better in that game. My pad level was better. I was better in my releases. I was better in press at the line of scrimmage. You got to find those small areas to make improvements throughout the rest of the year so that you can feel like when you are going to be tested overall and they're going to challenge you in multiple ways, you'll be solid with those things and be prepared for those teams you're going to face in December and January.
Absolutely. And then that's what they're going to be looking for against Wisconsin here, John. It's going to be a big weekend for the Ducks, not necessarily just because of the level of quality, but because you're trying to prove that you can blow out a second team in a row, because you're playing a team that, has already played some of these potential playoff opponents, and you get to see how you stack up against that performance. It's going to be a big game because the Ducks are debuting some new jerseys, the Grateful Dead jersey, and we're fired up to see those. John, I'll see you tonight. We'll see you at the game. We appreciate everybody for following along with our coverage here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.